So my name is Terence, and I'm going to give a talk about real-time React with Deepstream. So personally, I love real-time apps. I use Slack, Facebook. It feels like you're playing a game almost, right? And when I'm working with React, one of the challenges that I had was being able to use real-time libraries seamlessly. So I've done a lot of research on my own and did a lot of studies, and I found Deepstream, and I noticed that it works very well with React. So what is Deepstream? Deepstream is an open source real-time server, just like Firebase, but it's open source, and it's completely open source. It's free, and you can go and check out the source code. It's on GitHub. And it also supports wide array of platforms. You can do web, mobile, Internet of Things. It works seamlessly. It's also highly scalable. Scaling real-time applications are very, very tough, but Deepstream makes it a lot easier to do it because they provide you all the tools, all the benchmarks that you can run to test that. And it also has a native authentication support, and you can plug in your own authentication protocol to just make it work out of the box, so you don't have to worry about security. It also has data conflict resolution, so in the event that you make an update simultaneously as someone else, it would automatically understand what's going on in terms of the conflict and try to make a resolution on its own. So it also has really simple interfaces. It just has primitive almost primitive things, but a record, list, and events. So you can try it out here, deepstream.io. So to get into the Deepstream Basics is everything is in records. So record is a JSON object that holds data, right? So it's kind of like MongoDB and those type of databases. It's really simple to use. So you just call client.record.getRecord, and you pass in a record key, and it retrieves the item from the Deepstream server, and you're able to use it as if it's like a real-time object. So any changes that you make to that record is published to all the clients that's connected to it. So it's really simple. So you just subscribe to an item, and then you listen to it, and you can see the changes going on. So you can also generate unique keys. A lot of the times, people have issues with unique keys. And Deepstream provides you with tools for you to do that. And Deepstream also has a list type, which is a collection of records. So let's say you append an item into a list, then it will automatically propagate the changes to all the clients that's connected to it. And when you modify the list, it would also do the same. And let's say if it's a to-do list, then you can reorder things in real time using this list component. So Deepstream also has this event system, which is a very pub/sub type of system. WebSockets is very similar to WebSockets. You listen to an event, and then you emit an event. And it works really nicely. So you can send data from server to the client, client to client, or client to server. Doesn't really matter, right? It also has presence out of the box. So you can set this up and be able to have that little logged in user green icon next to the person's name, or show who's online. And when you build out that real-time chat, then you can have that full real-time effect, who's online now. So this is just a basic like diagram of like how authentication works. It's really simple. So the client says like, hey, I'm Chris, I want in, and then Deepstream says, Deepstream makes a request to your HTTP server and says, hey, Chris wants in, can he? And then your servers can say yes, no, and then just whatever the data that you want to return back with, like all the metadata, it automatically goes back to Deepstream, which goes back into the client. It's pretty simple, it's nice. So using React, it's for me like, you know, working with React, there's so many ways to do things now, right? Even before, like it's just constantly changing. But recently I've really settled down on like using higher order components. Also like use a functional, like a functional approach using like Recompose. And try to avoid like using Redux. I mean, I love Redux. I use it all the time, but like for using real time with Redux, introduced so many side effects for me because you constantly have to ignore like certain streams coming in. You constantly have to like manage all that internally. So if you just want only your client to subscribe to his stream, then I think like trying to avoid using Redux would be helpful in the future. Also, like keep it really simple. I think like by avoiding Redux, we can like make things a lot easier to use. Anyway, so higher order components. They're like a component wrapping another component. So it's a concept of like functional programming, like component in and component out. It allows you to create like reusable like component logic. And like on Facebook, like documentation, they talk about like why we're transitioning away from mixins, why we're moving into higher order components. So Recompose. How many of you guys heard of Recompose? How many of you guys heard of Lodash? Okay, cool. So Recompose is like a Lodash for HOC. So HOCs are the higher order components. And it literally like treats like HOCs like a function. So the higher order components are, you just have to think about it like, it wraps another component, and then it turns it into another component with additional features, right? So if you look at like an example here, withState is a high order component from Recompose. What it does is it pretty much like creates its own internal state and then passes it into the props. So you don't have to, so if you're using like a stateless a functional component, then you don't need to like write like set state this, manage like this dot state. You can just have one line called withState, and you can use props to manage that state. So with Recompose, you can like chain these HOCs, and you can chain as many as you want. At the end, like the entire like all the shared functionalities gets combined into a single component, and you can render it. And that's how we can like reuse like functionalities in React. So like in this example, we have like withState. They also have like map props. They have like pure, like makes the component like really pure. And then you can wrap the component like calling it like a function. So you name the function as enhance, and then you pass the base component into enhance, and it outputs the enhanced component. So why I talked about this early, like a little bit earlier, but we want to avoid using Redux because every architecture is different. Like every React application, I've seen so many that has their own implementation of Redux. Some people use like Relay, like GraphQL. Like the setup should not, the way that we want to introduce real time should not be affected by how your architecture is like. So what that means is like, let's say, there's hundreds of like different setup. Like our implementation should be able to just be able to work for all types. And we can do that using higher order components. We can do that by avoiding using Redux. And yeah, like I said, like making it like really easy to integrate into existing projects. Also make it really easy to take it out and replace it with something else. So personally, like when I write React components, like I always try to write it in like the visual way. So it should not have any logic. It's just the bare like presentation state. Then I use like Recompose or HighOrder Components to wrap the logic onto it. So if I want to one day switch out like React with Inferno or something, or Vue, then I'm not tied down to that React API. Cool. Am I going kind of fast? Okay, so let's get started. So I'm gonna try to like, show you examples on my computer. Hopefully it doesn't break. So we're gonna set up Deepstream into an existing React project, and we're gonna use these helper high order components. So I already made these before, this, and I'll put them on a GitHub like soon. So the goal is to take an existing component and just make it real time, like simple. Yeah, cool. Right. So I already have like Deepstream installed. So I just call Deepstream start. It starts my Deepstream. And here's my project. Can you guys see? Cool. So we're gonna start with like implementing Deepstream. And I created this Deepstream factory function, which just returns Deepstream. And it uses like the context, like the React context, to pass around the client object. So any like child components within this component will be able to access the client object. So this is how like React Router like is able to like the React Redux is able to like pass around the store. So we initialize the Deepstream client, we send it, we make it available to the children as client, and we render the component. Oops, sorry. So here, so Deepstream. So this kind of looks like if you use Redux, it would just be like provider, right? And then any component that you pass in is able to access the Deepstream. So I created like a really simple like example of a higher order function. It's called form data. It's not perfect, but the goal was to like try to avoid using like Redux. And all it does is it controls the forms so that any values that you change on there will get persisted into here with state HighOrder function. And then whenever the user or the component hits submit on a form, then it will just send back the values. And then this is the with record HighOrder function. Show you the slides again. So with record takes in a record key, which can be anything. It's just the key to persist in the database. And a prop name to specify like what kind of prop we should use when we're accessing it on our component. And the handlers are just set of like functions that you can call, like kind of like an actions. So for example, like if we want to update the record, then we will create a handler function inside of this HighOrder component, and then we're able to call that within our component. And same with like the with list, which just has a list key, which maps to a key in the database, and a prop name, which just, we can access that in our components. And same way like the handlers and fetch records. So when you specify fetch records, then it will asynchronously go and fetch all the records and populate it. Because the list itself does not have any data. It just holds an array of record keys. So in order for us to get the data inside of the list, we have to individually call fetch on like each individual records. And the form data I mentioned to you before, like just a helper to bootstrap how we handle the forms. Cool. I could talk about the code here, but it's literally just using like Deepstream API and then creating a HighOrder component. So in order for me to create a HighOrder component, I just create a component, and then I just put the logic in here, and then when I call render, I actually create another component and then wrap all the props and state and handlers and pass it in as a prop. So that's how HighOrder components are made, right? Like a function of that is a component that takes a component and gives you back a new component. Cool, so I'll go with the record example. So again, like this is just the composition of like HighOrder components. We have with state, which just creates a state variable inside. So this is the with record that I just showed you. So we pass in the record key, which is the key that corresponds to the key in the Deepstream, like the database. And then the message is the props that will pass down. So in our really simple component, it just has like a props.message, which is pretty much this. And then on submit, it just passes whatever the value is in the text area, and then persists it into Deepstream, like this. So I'm gonna create this record example, okay. So because I wrapped the Deepstream earlier, like I don't really have to worry about having that client throughout my code base. I just use this HighOrder component with record, which already has access to the Deepstream and is able to fetch data from like the same like shared instance. So in my app, I just have record example. Kind of like how Redux does it. Like if you look at like the connect components. Oops, sorry. Cool. So here. It's a really simple example. And then I go to make a new browser. Just put an emoji somewhere. And all the update, everything just it synchronizes throughout all the clients. So whatever I write, all the clients will be seeing it in real time. So going back to the code, record example. So just 17 lines of function composition or high order, whatever, compose, recompose. We're able to create real time on a really simple component. So I want to show you like what we can do in a more like detailed example. So, sorry. So this is a board, like kind of like how a chat application might look like. This is a really just simple, there's no interaction in this component. It's really just a presentation layer. There's no logic in here. It's just function, React component just doing nothing. So we can do what we just did, but with list this time because we want to be able to capture like a list-like format. The goal is to create like a chat application. So we're building a basic real-time board. And for this example, we use that Deepstream JS client. We also use like semantic UI to make it look pretty. And we use Recompose to do the composition. So this is the real-time board code, has the form data with list, and then it takes that really basic board and it wraps around HighOrder Components, and it calls the board on it. Therefore, we use this real-time board. This is the real-time message. You could also so it's like a really fun and simple way to just build a real-time chat. And we're able to do this with 40 lines with a bunch of comments. So the point was we could actually like put as many like real-time components as possible, like everywhere throughout our like application, and like it should just work. Cool. Thank you. Do you guys have any questions? That's a very good question. So you do have to handle that, and you do have to handle that so when you destruct the record object, then it should automatically like disconnect that. But if you disconnect from that entire like client, it should automatically pick that up. So here it says like, you can see like the incoming session clients and client disconnected is when I actually close out the browser. So it already handles the client disconnect, but for each record object that's like exists, has a listener on it. So you always have to destruct that. Here's an example. So when the component mounts, there's a record has a helper function called discard, which pretty much like unhooks everything from Deepstream, and it destroys that object. So you also want to do like a set timeout, because otherwise you're gonna get reference errors. Any other questions? Cool, thank you.